Well, hi folks, and welcome back to the channel and our second game of Devilry Afoot, the folk horror black powder monster hunting game. So in our last video, our intrepid monster hunters battled a coven of witches, and in this scenario, entitled the Dance Macabre, they're going to try to rescue a small settlement which has started putting up buildings on the old abandoned graveyard, which is always a great idea, but I guess they do it because the land is cheap. So here once again is our band of intrepid but somewhat inexperienced monster hunters. There on the right is Conrad von Kleist, a gentleman and a secret flagellant who has a sword, a pistol, and a stake tucked into his belt. That's a new purchase.
A very important one for this mission.
Right, since revenants, which our team is likely to encounter this game, are pretty hardy, but they are susceptible to wooden stakes. To Conrad's left is his loyal follower Sven, who has a bow. No stake for Sven. I guess because Sven kind of prefers to stand back and shoot arrows rather than get in the thick of things. To Sven's left is soldier Otto Bach, who has a torch, a pistol, and a brand new shiny wooden stake. To Otto's left is the all-important brother Thaddeus, who is a religious type with a buckler and a sword and a holy symbol. And since this scenario involves getting into the center of the graveyard and quoting some scripture successfully 3 times, Thaddeus is going to be pretty important because anybody can quote scripture, but the religious types are better at it and have a higher chance of success, especially if they're wielding a holy symbol. And since this scenario can accommodate up to 4 characters, a new monster hunter has joined the team, and that is Goodman Trout. Goodman Trout has a mace, a holy symbol, which is his sacred trout, and he also has a stake.
He was originally a fisherman, but he caught this special trout. It hasn't decayed, so that's why it became sacred, and that's why he decided to become a monster hunter.
So he was not with the team during the Discovery of Witches last game, but he has joined them for the Dance Macabre to help banish a specter and what may be a horde of revenants. There's only one on the table now, but there may be more later. So as I said, in this scenario, the local village has begun expanding, perhaps unwisely, into the old ancient burial ground just outside of town, and the dead have begun to rise. So here's one revenant right here. And during the game, depending on what this one revenant rolls for his movement, more revenants may spawn from the old plague pit down here. So revenants are very tough, they're very aggressive, but they don't move very fast sometimes, and they're also vulnerable to stakes. So regular weapons take some time to whittle them down, but a good old-fashioned stake might kill them in one strike if you get lucky. The graveyard is also home to this angry specter who is going to float around and try to intimidate people. Specters are non-corporeal, so you can't really harm them with physical weapons, but they can be wounded and subsequently banished by successful quotation of scripture. So again, that's where Brother Thaddeus is really helpful. And also Goodman Trout has a holy symbol, so he's not quite as good at quoting scripture as Brother Thaddeus, but he's better than the average layperson. Okay, and since this is going to be our second on-screen game of Devilry Afoot, we're not going to spend as much time kind of calculating the actual target number for every die roll. So if you want some of those specifics, check out our last video, The Discovery of Witches, and if you want even more details on the game, check out the intro video we published a few weeks ago, and that'll give you a better sense of what's going on here. But today it's mostly going to be just about the gameplay, and we want to keep things light and breezy so we can perhaps play another game before Halloween without bogging down in the editing too much.
And the playing is just more fun than the editing.
Right, the game time is more fun than the editing time, definitely. And here are the snazzy new game tokens that Lynn made for me at the local makerspace, so thanks very much, Lynn. And here's one for the innocents if they factor in, but we have 2 for the revenants, 3 for the specter, and then 4 for the monster hunters. Sven doesn't get a token, but he just activates with Conrad because Sven's just a follower. Oh yeah, and one more thing. In our last game, we treated holy symbols like kind of an amulet, so we assumed that the character was wearing them and they were passive, and then you just got the benefit of the effect. But we were subsequently informed by the author, Nick Wright, that a holy symbol has to be carried in a hand and sort of brandished. So depending on what Thaddeus and Goodman Trout are carrying, they may have to spend an action to swap items to get the holy symbol in hand when they need it. But for right now, Thaddeus is carrying his sword and his buckler, and his holy symbol is tucked away. And Goodman Trout has a mace in one hand and a stake in the other, and his holy symbol is also tucked away. So when the time comes, if they find they need a holy symbol, they will dig it out at the cost of 1 action. So for right now, they don't have a holy symbol in hand. So that's kind of a bummer.
That is a real bummer. I liked it when it was just always there.
That's right, an amulet of protection.
Yes.
But it isn't. You have to hold that trout in front of you. Be gone, Spectre, be gone!
Exactly.
All right, we'll jump straight into today's game, but first, just a quick reminder to please support your favorite indie wargaming channels, whether that's ours or somebody else's, by clicking, liking, commenting, subscribing, and if possible, throwing some change in the old tin cup. Essentially, you get to decide which hobby content creators survive on YouTube and which just fade away. So yeah, I'd encourage you to do whatever you're able to support the content you like so you can see more of it. Thank you kindly. Now on with the show. So the monster hunters have deployed on this side of the table, and their overall goal is going to be to get to this center area here over the old plague pit and quote scripture 3 times. Brother Thaddeus and Goodman Trout are going to be better at that than some of the other hunters, but anybody can try, and if they successfully do it 3 times, then the curse is broken and they win the game. In the meantime, however, the specter over here is going to be floating around trying to intimidate people. It basically just screams at them and makes them run away until they manage to dispel it by quoting scripture. Also at the start of the game, there is a single revenant right here. He's pretty tough, he's pretty aggressive, but he doesn't always move very fast. However, if we get a die roll that says he doesn't move at all, then another revenant will pop out of the old plague pit here, and all of a sudden there's 2 revenants. And anytime a revenant token is drawn from the bag, every revenant on the table gets to move. So you start out with 1, but once there's 2, suddenly there's twice as many opportunities to spawn more revenants. And once you have 3 or 4 or 5 on the table, they all could get a die result that spawns more revenants. So who knows how many revenants we're going to have on the table. So if possible, we want to dispatch that revenant as quickly as we can.
And have him only roll 4s and above.
Right, a movement roll of 4 or above means he actually makes some forward locomotion. 3 or less means he spawns a revenant, but doesn't go anywhere. So he just stands there while another revenant pops out of the ground. So that's what's going to happen. This could all go horribly wrong.
Very horribly wrong, because they have 6 wounds.
They have 6 wounds, but a stake does 1d10 damage. So if you can get in there and stake it, that might be the thing to do. All right, once again, we're using the Mystic Bag of Fate right here. We put the tokens inside, and we're going to draw and see who activates first here on turn 1. So are you ready?
Ready.
The hunters. Monster hunters get to deploy 1 character. So they pick 1 and move him.
Conrad and Sven.
Conrad and Sven, his loyal follower. So which one first, Conrad or Sven?
Sven, so Conrad doesn't get in his way.
Okay. So with the light of the torch, I think you need just a 4+ for activations.
10 and a 1.
10 and a 1. So Sven gets 1 action.
Well, I guess he'll just shoot. He will attempt to shoot.
So he's going to shoot the revenant over here. So the revenant's going to get a little cover from this wall. He's also in the shadows here by the plague pit. So that's -3 for Sven's shot.
So he needs 8+.
All right, Sven rolled an 8. That's what he needed. So he hits the revenant.
So now we roll on the wound chart.
Bow is -1.
So 5 is a light wound. Target suffers 1 wound.
So Sven, who spent most of the last game quivering in his boots, actually sticks an arrow into this revenant for 1 point. So that brings it down to 5. All right, that was Sven's activation. Now Conrad gets to do something. So he gets 2 actions. So he's going to move his 4.
And then he can move again, right?
He can move again if he wishes to. Is he going to try to warn the villagers?
He's going to try to warn the villagers.
All right. So he's not quite there yet, but at some point Conrad is going to get over to this door. He's going to use an action to open it, and he will warn any villagers inside that there's monsters out there, so that a monster doesn't just show up at this door, break in, and eat everybody in the building, which would be bad because you get less experience if there's innocents who are killed.
Very true.
Protect the innocents.
And we need all the experience we can get.
All right, the next entity to activate is the Spectre. And so just go ahead and roll a d10 and we'll see what he does. He's going to stalk. Okay, so the Spectre here is going to stalk, which means he moves 4 inches toward the nearest human, which would put him right about there. So I guess he's stalking Conrad von Kleist. And the next entity to activate is one of the hunters. And who's that going to be?
Goodman Trout.
Goodman Trout. And he's within 4 inches of the torch. That gives him a bonus on his activation roll.
He's also gallant, so if he's within 6 inches of another hunter, he gets a +1. So he normally activates on a 4+, so he will activate on a 2+.
4 and an 8. 2 activations for Goodman Trout. So he's going to move twice.
He's swift, so he can move 10 inches.
All right. So Goodman Trout can move 5 inches and then move 5 inches again because he has 2 activations. Is he going to face that Revenant in hand-to-hand?
He is.
Wow. He's trying to prove himself. He is gallant, so what others think of him is important to him.
Is very important. And he's got his fish.
Yeah, Goodman Trout has a holy symbol, but he's carrying a mace in one hand and a stake in the other, and so the fish is tucked away in a pouch. All right, who's next? The Revenant gets to move. So Goodman Trout is within 6 inches of the Revenant, so the Revenant automatically attacks. We just roll for movement. 5. So Revenants move 1d10 minus 3, so that's only 2 inches. So the Revenant shambles up. So a few more things about Revenants. When they're hit, the roll to wound suffers a -1 modifier. They're immune to poison, and they have the stench of death and decay, which means all hunters within 4 inches will suffer a -1 modifier to all activation rolls. So that would include poor Goodman Trout on his next activation. All right, who's next? Spectre. The Spectre here is within 6 inches of Conrad. 2.
Stock.
So that means it's going to move up to Conrad, but not do anything. So it stalks him. So poor Conrad finds himself face to face with a non-corporeal specter that is immune to physical weaponry. Though Conrad could try to quote scripture at it, I guess. Or Thaddeus could. He's right over here.
Yeah, and he hasn't activated yet.
All right, who's next? Revenant. All right, let's see what happens. I got a 1. I roll a 1 on the movement roll for the Revenant, which means another Revenant pops out of the ground. And then there were 2. Okay, not what we wanted.
Not what we wanted.
So the next activation is the Spectre. Spectre moves once again. So the Spectre is well within 6 inches. He gets a 4.
Intimidate.
Intimidate. So he's going to try to intimidate poor Conrad by making a blood-curdling shriek. So Conrad has to make a resolve roll to avoid running away. Needs a 4+, gets a 9, so he's fine. His resolve holds. But he has a shrieking specter right in front of him. All right, let's see who activates next. So the only 2 hunters that haven't activated yet are Otto and Thaddeus. So this should be one of them, because I think we've used all the monster chips. Hunter.
So Brother Thaddeus activates on a 2+.
Because of the torch nearby. 2 and a 5, so he gets his 2 activations. So he's spending 1 action to swap out his buckler for a holy symbol. And
he's going to attempt to quote scripture at the Spectre.
so a regular character attempting to quote scripture makes a resolve roll at -4. A holy man gets to roll 2 dice and pick the best result. And if he's carrying a holy item out front, then he gets a +1 modifier. So roll 2 dice, and you need a 6 or above on one of them.
Got a 7.
7 and a 1. So since this is a specter, you actually wound it. So roll on the wound chart.
4.
4. A light wound. Target suffers 1 wound. Spectre normally has 3 wounds, so he's down to 2.
Good job, Brother Thaddeus.
Good job, Thaddeus. And that's the last chip. That's a hunter, and so that's going to be Otto, who hasn't activated yet.
He activates on a 3+ because of his torch. So 2 activations.
So Otto's carrying a torch, and he's going to move to where it might provide maximum illumination. So Otto's moved up, and he's going to try to illuminate as many of his fellow monster hunters as possible. Okay, reloading the Bag of Fate for turn 2. There's a couple of Revenants on the board right now, which means 2 Revenants will activate every time we draw a Revenant token. So hilarity will probably ensue. So what do you want, a hunter or a monster?
Definitely a hunter.
It looks like the Spectre. So the Spectre is within 6 inches. 1!
He hides.
He hides. Okay, so the Spectre has chosen to hide. I guess the scripture quoting from Brother Thaddeus has him rattled. So he moves back to this fallen tree and hides in the shadows back there. Okay. You ready for another one?
Yes.
What do you think it's going to be?
Something bad, because there's more bad chips in there.
A Revenant. Actually, 2 Revenants, because both of them get to activate now. So we'll start with this one right here. It's close to Goodman Trout. So 4. He attacks. He moves 1 inch. I think that does get in there, just barely. So it stumbles forward 1 inch and attacks Goodman Trout. So the Revenant attacks with a 6+. 10. Gets a 10. So it hits Goodman Trout. 9. Target suffers 2 wounds. So Goodman Trout has suffered a serious wound which will debilitate him somewhat during gameplay. Alright, here's the second Revenant right here. He gets a 3, which is no movement, but another Revenant. So now this Revenant didn't get to move, but another Revenant crawls out of the plague pit. And things are quickly getting out of hand. Alright, the next entity to activate is a Hunter. So, who's activating?
Goodman Trout.
Goodman Trout, who has 2 wounds.
He activates on a 5+. Nope.
2 4s, no activations.
His fish is rotting.
The Hunters activate once again. So are you thinking Brother Thaddeus?
Yep, we're going to get him up closer. So he activates on a 2+.
7 and an 8, so 2 activations for Brother Thaddeus.
Brother Thaddeus needs to get within 6 inches of the Spectre.
So Thaddeus is right here, the Spectre is right here, and Thaddeus is going to quote some scripture at it. Rolls 2 dice, picks the best one. 8 and a 6, he gets it. So he wounds the Spectre with some deft quoting of scripture. Now you roll on the wound chart. 1. It's nothing, though. He almost wounds it. He irritates it. Next entity to activate is the Spectre. So the Spectre is within 6 inches of a bunch of humans. And he gets a 3.
Stalk.
Stalk. I thought for sure he'd intimidate them. So he stalks, he moves up to Conrad once again. So the Spectre has moved up and he says hello to Conrad once again. He must like him. Perhaps he's someone from Conrad's past that Conrad wronged and now he's here to haunt him.
Perhaps.
Hunters activate once again. So that would mean Otto Bach or Conrad and Sven. And if the Hunters decide at some point this is a losing venture and they get overwhelmed, they can just quit the game and run off. They won't get any silver, but they will keep their skins. So Conrad right here and Sven over here are going to activate. So Conrad, if he had the activations, would like to run over here and fight this Revenant. All right, let's see what his activations are.
3+. With a 10 and a 3, he can get there.
So he used both of his actions to run up, and at the end of the second one, he can do a running attack, which is at a -1, but a +1 on the damage roll if he hits. 6, he hits. So that's what he needed.
So now he rolls on the wound chart.
1, a scratch. So Conrad bravely ran up to try to assist Goodman Trout. Conrad did hit the Revenant, but did no damage. Plus, Revenants are resistant to damage anyway, so that would have been a 0. Hunters. Hunters activate once again. But before we do that, we forgot about Sven, so Sven needs to do something.
So he activates on a 5+.
Okay.
1 activation.
1 activation for Sven. So Sven can't quite see anybody over here because of the scrum, so he's just going to move up. So he moves right there. And then you have another Hunter to activate. And that would be Otto. 3 and 3.
2 activations.
2 activations for Otto because of the torch. So Otto's going to move twice. 3 on his first one and 4 on his second one. And he's going to get right in here to help fight. Otto is firing his pistol in close combat, which you can do. And he gets a 9, so he hits. Now we're rolling on the wound chart, but a -1 because it's a zombie. 5, -1, 4.
1 wound.
1 wound on the zombie. Taking it down to 4. I don't know about this. Things are not looking great for the monster hunters. The Spectre activates once again. He's within 6 inches of Thaddeus. 10.
Intimidate.
So he's going to try to intimidate Brother Thaddeus. Thaddeus has to make a resolve roll. 1. And he fails it. So sadly, Thaddeus runs 4 inches. Our board actually starts 3 inches from the edge because this is a 2x2 play area. So Thaddeus has run off the board. He gets scared by a Spectre and he takes off. So there's one Revenant here who's basically fighting 3 Hunters at the same time. And then there's 2 Revenants over here one who's just standing there and one that's freshly emerged. But let's see what happens with the last token. And that is the revenants once again. So this revenant here is just going to attack, but it's going to be at random because he's surrounded by 3 people. We'll roll to see which one. 3. Conrad right here. So the revenant pivots to look at Conrad. And attacks. 8. He hits. Rolls on the wound chart. Gets an 8, so that's 2 wounds on Conrad. So Conrad is down to 1. So both of these revenants are within 6 inches of the scrum, so they're going to move in and attack. It just depends how many inches they get to move. So we'll start with this one here. He moves 1, so he doesn't move at all, but another zombie emerges. And this one back here. He also moves 1, which is nothing at all, and another zombie emerges. So right now the zombies, they're not moving very much, but they're just emerging from the plague pit, which doesn't bode well for our fearsome monster hunters because 2 of them have 2 wounds and Brother Thaddeus has run off the board. So as we go into the next turn, Lynn, are you suggesting that maybe we just
Run away.
we run away, which you can do.
I think with our best scripture quoter having left the board, it is time to quickly flee.
Okay, boys, I think it's time for some team building back at the tavern, and we'll evaluate our strategy and perhaps take another stab at it another time. So the monster hunters are going to retire from the battlefield, and the villagers will just have to sort this out on their own. And frankly, they shouldn't have built on the ancient burial ground anyway, so let that be a lesson to you. The property may be cheap, but there are some hidden costs. All right, well, Goodman Trout feels like that was probably a wise decision because his first hunt didn't go as planned, and Conrad was being all courageous until he took a big zombie claw to the face. So both of those guys are wounded, and they'll need to roll on the wound chart to see if there's any debilitating injuries that are going to carry over. But at least Otto and Sven escaped unscathed, and we won't talk about Brother Thaddeus, who at some point lost his nerve and left everybody behind right when they needed him the most. So, Thaddeus. All right, folks, I'm sorry we couldn't give you a more conclusive resolution, but that's the way it goes sometimes. These zombies just kept crawling out of the plague pit, and at some point they were going to mobilize and start getting some actual movement out of their movement rolls, at which point I think the monster hunters would have been overwhelmed because they're pretty hard to take out unless you have a stake or something like that. Yeah, this is unfortunately a monster hunter failure. Unfortunately, they reserved a few shillings just for this contingency, so they won't have to sleep in a ditch. They can sleep with a roof over their head and some ale and some chicken and nurse their wounds and perhaps come back to fight monsters another day. I'm hopeful that we can squeak in another game here before Halloween, time permitting, and perhaps that will have a rosier outcome. In the meantime, I hope your fall is going well. Until we see you again, take care of yourselves and watch out for those revenants.